Om Shri Rama Rama Ramati Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tatulyam Rama Nama Varanani. I delight in the beautiful name of Shri Rama again and again, for even once remembered, the name of Shri Rama bestows the fruit equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. Apadam apam hartaram dataram sarvasampadam lokabhiramam Shri-Ramam bhuyo bhuyo namamyaham. I bow down again and again to Sri Rama, who is the remover of all our misfortunes, the giver of prosperity, and who is the beloved of the whole universe. Ramaya Ramar Bhadraya Ramachandraya Vedase Raghunathaya Nathaya Sitaya Pataye Namaha. Salutations to the Lord Rama, who is present in all beings as Rama, also as Ramabhadra, Ramachandra, and so on, the Lord of the Raghu Vamsa, and the husband of Sita. Om Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Victory, victory, and glory to Rama, repeatedly. So these prayers, of course, remind us of why we are studying this text, the story of Rama, the Ramayana. First of all, we delight in the beautiful name of Rama. We have to remember how Valmiki came across this term, repeating Mara, 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 the evil one, the one that tempts us. And of course, the opposite of perfection, righteousness, and duty is Rama, Rama. And that's his transformation of ideas. And then you see, we have to remember that he bestows equal, or fruit equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. We have to remember, theologically, he is the incarnation, the cosmic balancing power that comes from time to time to set right all the adjustments for humanity, what we call adharma. So we know that in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells us that yada yada hi dharmasya, from age to age I am born. Why should that be? It's because the whole of nature is in a constant state of adjustment. And if we trace back the origin of the universe, it is a cosmic balancing power that is doing this, whether it be in terms of adjusting matter, antimatter, or adjusting the balance of galaxies spinning, or the adjustment of the pull of gravity versus the electrical energy making things fly off, or whether it is the weather on this planet Earth, or whether it is the struggle that Mother Earth has in the face of global warming, or whether it is in the domestic environment where people have to get on well together. And one thing we know about life is it's very different from a fairy story. And that is why this Ramayana and this Mahabharata, these two great epics, are histories. Why? Because if there were fairy stories, things would end happily ever after. Yes, some kind of disruption, some kind of misfortune happens, but it always comes out right in the end. It's not a fairy story. Life is not a fairy story. Viewed in a certain way, life is problematic, life is hard, it's full of challenges. Viewed in another way, it is a drama, it is a play. And we find this drama starting not on earth, it starts in heaven, just to remind us. And more recently, we know there are consequences. King Dasaratha, he was fighting a war between, and he was on the side of devas and demons. There was a war. And we may say, if this is a historical account, how can they be this devas and asuras and so on? But really, we have to see this story in the light of deeper philosophy. And it means that there is a constant struggle between dharma and adharma, the thing that holds things together in harmony and the things that wants to disrupt it. And without these two forces, we don't have anything existing at all. So we have to accept it philosophically. Now we'll recall when we last met, discussing the story of Rama, how everything was joyous, how everything was going well. Even so, we have the necessity for Rama and Lakshmana going in at the request of Vishwamitra in order to make things well for the important sacrifices done in the forests by those dedicated to the welfare of humanity. And naturally, truth wins out. As the Mundaka Upanishad tells us, Satyameva Jayate, truth ultimately, eventually, truth always triumphs. Because truth is the basis of everything, of the whole existence. And it is the basis for our search for truth. We're always looking for truth. But sometimes we have to make very difficult decisions. Sometimes we have to weigh up the moral and ethical consequences of our thoughts and actions. There's a kind of a story about somebody who owned a racehorse, and it had an outstanding record. The only thing was its physical condition was erratic. Sometimes it would have big boils and lumps on its legs. Sometimes it hobbled. Sometimes it wasn't that successful. It had to be withdrawn from a race. And so what to do about this? So the horse owner consults a friend who wasn't that ethical. And the friend said, well, you see, sometimes it's in good condition and it runs successfully and earns you lots of money. At other times, it's, doubtful. And how many times did you have to withdraw the horse from races? Many, many times. I suggest you sell it. I can't sell it when it has big boils on its legs and it's limping. No. Wait until it's perfectly healthy and running, and then sell it. That means you pass the problem on to an unsuspecting person. And so this is the kind of morality that many people have faced in business, or in politics, or even in day-to-day living. How to adhere to truth, absolutely. Is there such a thing as a white lie, you see? And what is truthfulness? That your thoughts, your words, and your actions all match together. Slightest deviation from this, we can say, upsets the whole harmony of everything. Now, of course, it's a very high value, and that is why Rama is such an ideal, because Rama represents a very, very high ideal, and all the characters in the story try to live up to this ideal. Now, we know from the last time, Queen Kaikeyi was dedicated to Rama. Not only was she dedicated to Rama, probably more than her own son Bharata, but she was also the favorite queen of Dasaratha. This is a human story. This is a real story. The king, in order to ensure succession and progeny, his first wife, really, Kausalya, he's not so enamored with. He's not so dedicated, not as much as Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi is his favorite queen. And so we see that all of us have some kind of attachment at some point, and that has consequences. Because you see, your friend of today could easily be your enemy tomorrow. This is the vacillation of human nature itself. And it's not to do with a person as a person. It's to do with what is going through the human mind, how we react, what our suspicions are. In Patanjali Yoga Sutras, they tell us about a certain wave in the mind, in the mental field, called a verbal delusion is how it's translated. And I think I mentioned before, I often puzzled, what is verbal delusion? It doesn't seem that important. Well, verbal delusion is as a result of you talking to yourself in an inaccurate way because you have imagination. And so the drama unfolds because Kaikeyi is made, who has been seen to be the embodiment of evil, is persuading Kaikeyi and introducing some suspicions into her mind. And it doesn't have to be a real person. We have enough experience to know that in any moment in time, some suspicion can enter into the mind and deviate the mind from truthful thinking, create a kind of agitation in the mind, a suspicion, a doubt, a fear, a temptation. And so two things arise for Queen Kaikeyi. As we know, just to review, mantra suggests that, well, your own son is Bharata, you're the favorite queen, and you see Rama belongs to Kausalya, and when he becomes king on the following day, coronation is due on the following day, then of course your own son Bharata will fall into disfavor, and that means Kausalya will be not only the first queen, but the favorite queen, and you'll be secondary. His affection for you, Dasaratha's affection for you, will diminish. And you will no longer enjoy the favor of the king's tremendous affection for you. Secondly, in the ancient days, as I have mentioned previously, if we go back to, for example, not so long ago, the Ottoman Empire, where the Muslim kings regularly did away with their brothers, because the brother becomes a threat to succession. And so we had to have there had to be elaborate things in the royal court. Food had to be tasted, the threat of poisoning, or a military coup or some such thing, because the thirst for power is extremely powerful in the human being. And that emotion overrides power, greed. These emotions override anything else. So do away with the problem ruthlessly. And we find throughout Muslim sultanates this history occurring. And we find out in ancient times, even medieval times, not so ancient, we find these plots going on and dealing with things absolutely ruthlessly. And so this happened to Kaikeyi, normally a wonderful woman, loving mother, a devoted queen, enjoying the favor of King Dasaratha. And this suspicion comes in, it grows like a cancer in her mind. This is a very human story, it can happen to anybody. And so Lama, in contrast to that, is the embodiment of truthfulness. And we see the human element of Dasaratha. His affection for Queen Kaikeyi is such, his attachment is such, when she is sorrowful, then he takes every means to appease her. But you see, she remembers these two boons given and not fulfilled by the king. And she now gives these two boons. So this is a contrast between all the joy and celebration and preparation happening. Imagine now the scene. Put it personally. You yourself have been given a wonderful opportunity in life, an amazing opportunity. And you couldn't have a better opportunity in terms of wealth, in terms of prestige, in terms of status, in terms of a career move. You're at the height of your career. And all of a sudden, within a very short period of time, a matter of hours, the whole thing changes. You have to leave it all alone. You have to abandon all the opportunities of gaining absolute wealth and power, prestige, status. All of this is gone in a flash. What will your reaction be? And here's the test of character. So we have to investigate what is Rama's reaction. We know what Dasaratha's reaction is. It's a human reaction. He becomes absolutely distraught, and his manliness as a king now changes. You see, not so long ago, 1936, in England, a similar scene was being enacted. The young man, Edward, was supposed to succeed his father as king, and everybody had hope. His father was very formal, very remote from the people. Loved, no doubt, but very remote. He'd gone through the First World War, and now a new hope arises. The young Edward is very different. He has a different style, very informal. He winks at people and so on. Very much beloved. But you see, a plot is hatched. And the plot is that he falls in love with a divorcee, and the divorcee actually is mobilizing her own career. She now gets within the royal circle. She's also married, and the husband is also getting a benefit from this royal association, getting rich actually. Rich and to some extent influential. But from the king's side, his heart is becomes turned over, and he becomes extremely emotionally attached to Wallis Simpson. Wallis Simpson, if it came to light that she was ever crowned king, the Prime Minister Baldwin understood this would be the most unpopular thing in England. Almost impossible. You cannot marry a divorcee. Not only a divorcee, but twice divorced, if she divorces her husband. And she did. And the king was so emotionally attached, all his reasoning went, and his sense of duty went. And so he makes a radio announcement eventually. He abdicates. And his brother, who is not trained in any way and has a speech impediment, is of a nervous disposition, now has to take on the burden of monarchy. So these are difficult choices everyone has to make. And this whole episode of Rama having to make these choices, Dasaratha having to make these choices, and a number of other people are affected. Rama is married to Sita, the love of his life. Therefore, many, many births. They are so attached to each other. They're the model of marriage. They're two sides of the same coin. They take the marriage seriously in the sense that it's a union, it's a junction, where two people become one person. What to do? These are unthought of problems. I don't think Kaikeyi ever thought about it, because passion takes over, suspicion takes over. And when we live in the emotional mind, it's difficult to settle down into reasoning. How will her son Bharata take up the challenge? He also loves Rama. And so Dasaratha is quite clear. If Rama accepts, because that's her second boon, that firstly, Rama should not be king, that he should actually go and live in the forest, make his own way, take all the austerity of a forest life with gathering roots and berries and fruits, living on that for 14 years. 14 years. And he's to do this alone is the inference. It's not stated. And the second one is that my own son Bharata should now be crowned king. There should be a coronation. The same items for Rama's coronation should be done for Bharata. And Bharata is away. He's completely unaware of this. And Dasaratha says, if he accepts this, I disown him. And by the way, Kaikeyi, you're no longer associated with me. Kaikeyi accepts all this. And this sudden change has deeply, deeply emotionally hurt Dasaratha. First of all, he's attached to his queen and cannot believe that this has happened and has to sever his ties. Secondly, he's so attached to Lama and has to sever his ties there for 14 years. And what about the people? What will they think? They're all ready for this coronation. And Rama is so popular because of his virtues, the ideal king. And so there's a disappointment. There are consequences for everybody in this. So the curious question is, when this announcement is made to Rama, how will he react? Everybody is waiting. How will he react? Now, there are a number of human reactions that could take place. There could be anger against the Queen Kaikeyi. We could just assert ourselves militarily and say, it doesn't matter. These are promises. That's okay. We won't honor the father's promises. Common sense will take over, as it were, and we will do that. But Rama's situation is very different. No. And Dasaratha is honorable enough to keep his promise. So Dasaratha is dedicated, despite his attachment, is dedicated to truth. And such a tragic turn of events. In all our lives, how do we manage sudden changes in events, sudden changes in weather, sudden changes in fortune? They happen. The most sudden change of all is the impact of death and having to deal with bereavement. How do we deal with all these issues? And they arise. It's the nature of nature itself. And so Dasaratha cannot find himself enough courage to face Rama. Kaikeyi, with the bold, wily wit of somebody obsessed with a purpose, says, never mind, I will do it. The king has become weak and the queen has become strong. Strong-willed. And so we find ourselves with a scenario after the king having begged and wept and bargained and so on and so forth, and the queen remaining absolutely immobile on this subject. Now we learn from letters coming back to Edward that Mrs. Simpson, the much beloved love of King Edward, Wallace Simpson didn't really want to go on with this. She would have been quite happy to go back to her husband, and her husband would be quite happy to accept her. And so we can see from letters now revealed that she wants to get out of this, but the king has caught her. So it's all a one-sided business. And that means that the king that is supposed to be exhibiting strength is now exhibiting tremendous weakness. And this is being exploited. And there's a trap. Wallace Simpson cannot get out of it. And she begs, she says, no, forget me. Don't abdicate. But the king is overwhelmed with emotion and does it. So in this circumstance, historical circumstance, the king abdicates, King Edward abdicates. It's not like going into the forest necessarily, but he abdicates and creates a whole turmoil for the nation that had so much hope. So Rama has a very different reaction to this. He's very calm, very unemotional in a sense. Anyway, the scene begins like this at the crack of dawn. And when all the sutras begin to sing outside the door to wake the king, and the sky is overcast at this moment in time, says the poet, and the people of Ayodhya wondered that the morning Rama was to be crowned should be so forbidding. It used to be sunny, such a foreboding day, and it seemed an evil omen on this auspicious day, and soon a great drizzle began, even though this scene is not in Ireland. Kaikeyi prodded the king awake that morning, the morning of that fate. The king has spent the night on the floor weeping and wailing. Now he's exhausted and the queen prods him, come on. And he hoped to wake from his nightmare to find that all of this had been just a last night nightmare or dream. But the ugly greed in her eye, his queen said to him, don't bring shame on yourself, Dasaratha, by breaking your sacred word, she reminds him. And he groaned, he awoke trembling. His eyes darted around the room, now filling with one light, and Dasaratha whispers, let Rama be prepared to perform Tarpana for me, and the water meant for the Abhisheka. And he looked imploringly at Kaikeyi, and she wore finery once more. You remember, she was disheveled in distress. And her ornaments glittered on her body, and she shook him roughly and cried, enough! The day has dawned. Send for Bharata and have him crowned. Let Rama leave for the forest. Now, in the meanwhile, Sumantra, who was the faithful charioteer, he is summoned in order to bring Rama to the palace. So Sumantra goes to Rama's palace, where Sita and Rama were getting ready for the coronation. They don't suspect anything. And then Sumantra gives to Rama the message that the king and Queen Kaikeyi together, they want his presence. So Rama hastens, of course, to obey. And the unexpected delay in the strange goings on, the coronation is about to happen, it arouses some doubts, but of course in people's minds, but no one dares talk about these doubts. And the men concerned hoped that somehow things would turn out right and went on with their allocated work. Don't forget, the streets are all brightly decorated and the great hour is approaching. And as in the Queen's chamber, strange and sinister events are starting now to unfold. So the people are getting restless because the coronation should have started. The procession should have gone on. So why is this long delay? People are starting to titter. Perhaps the preliminary rites are more elaborate than we had thought. Perhaps, some delay somehow in modern language. Perhaps the household cavalry has not assembled properly. But of course, in the meantime, the crowds are now getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more impatient. Nothing is happening. Anyway, Sumantra takes Rama. Sumantra is like the chauffeur. So he takes Rama to Kaikeyi's palace, threading the way with difficulty through the throng. And Rama now enters the queen's apartment. And as he steps over the threshold, he stares as if his foot had been struck by a snake. For he sees with awestruck amazement his father lying on the bare floor in anguish. And I don't think he's ever seen his father like this. Don't forget, his father is a strong king, has won many battles, is a good ruler, a wise counselor, and a compassionate person in terms of his people. The strength of a king is there, and there he is, in this state. So naturally, out of respect, as is the custom, he touches his father's feet and pays also filial sonly worship to Kaikeyi. And Dasaratha now utters in a low voice the name of Rama and then stops. He can't do the deed. He can't say what is the future destiny, what is going to happen now. And he can't speak anymore. And so he looks straight into the face of Rama. And Rama, of course, is a little perplexed, filled with apprehension at the sight of his father lying there, unable to speak, in the grip of some great agony, and wonders what it could be. So he turns to Kaikeyi and says, "Mother, it's indeed very strange. And no matter how angry he was, my father would speak sweetly to me. Maybe my father is angry with me. And have I, without knowing it, have I in some way offended him in any matter? Can you please ask him? Or maybe has he fallen sick all of a sudden? Or has someone spoken to him rudely and needs to be avenged? Please tell me what has happened. I don't want to be kept in suspense any longer." And so the bold Kaikeyi seizes the chance and says, "The king is angry with no one. Nothing wrong with his health, but there's something in his mind which he is afraid to tell you. And so that is all. He's afraid to say it to you because he doesn't want to hurt you." That's how she puts it. And that's why he can't say anything. That's why he's silent. Once upon a time, pleased with me, he offered and accepted a gift, 2 boons, he explains. Now, like an uncultured person, the king regrets that he did gave these 2 boons. And so I question, is this worthy of him? He criticizing her own husband in front of the son. Is it not becoming of a king to pledge his word and then regret it? If you give your word, you should surely carry it out. You have the power to fulfill his promise. But he is afraid even to tell you. And he's also afraid of thinking, even of violating his word. So I'm asking you, would it be right if he goes against his word and becomes untruthful? If you assure him that he needn't be anxious about your attitude and that he should keep his word at all costs, then you'll give him the needed strength to behave in a proper way, in a righteous way, in a truthful way. You must give him the help he needs. The thing is in your hands entirely. I shall tell you what it is, but after this, promise me that you will help the king to fulfill his promise. Now, she knows the character of Rama inwardly, but still she's thinking, her mind has lowered down, she's thinking everybody is like, the lowest of human beings, and he will actually not fulfill the pledge of the father. He will say, no, I'm sorry, my father promised these, but never mind. Coronation preparations are ready, the people are ready, I'm going to go ahead. Of course, he could say this. You see, these are difficult choices. We could go against truth. We could go against our word for convenience sake. We could change our mind for convenience sake. Truthfulness is or the opposite, of course, untruthfulness, is what is behind corruption. And corruption, if we accept one corrupt thing, then it goes all through society like a cancer. I remember my own teacher, my sannyas guru and my philosophy teacher, visiting India. It's the only time I've seen him angry. And what was it? And it was about the corruption that he found in India, from the customs officer all the way up to the banking teller, banking clerk, all the way up to the politicians, so that it somehow has become the norm. Same thing in Africa. What we call a border post, we call bribes and customs. And as soon as you do that, or take advantage of maybe a connection, a valuable connection, you've now gone into murky waters. So this value of truth is very tricky. When I first came to Ireland, I came across people who said, yes, of course I'll keep in touch with you next week. It means I never want to see you again in my whole life. So we have to be careful about truthfulness, because truthfulness is the shining stone, if you like, the shining clarity, the shining quality that reveals our own true nature at the bottom of it. Science is proud of its investigations, and yet I'm told that about 60% of peer-reviewed scientific papers, the data cannot be replicated. In other words, in a hurry to win something like a Nobel Peace Prize or something, you put a model before and are careless about the data. You orientate the data toward the wished for outcome. And I've come across this in a number of circumstances where data is fudged in order to get the result that a person wants and to get funding in the scientific world. Anyway, Lama's initial reaction, he's saddened, of course, at the thought that he should in any way be the occasion of distress to his father. So there's this compassion, and he says to Kaikeyi, "Mother, am I indeed the cause of all this trouble? I don't deserve that you should have any doubts about me. And if my father asks me to jump into the fire, I won't hesitate to do it. If he asks me to drink poison, then I'll do it. I'll do it even without hesitation." See the nobility of Rama. On the verge of his coronation, I'll drink poison, I'll jump into the fire if necessary. I'll do the honorable thing, whatever he wants. I'm dedicated to my father because the scriptures are telling us, let your father, let your mother be a god unto you, your guest be a god unto you, your teacher be a god unto you, and so on and so forth. So, because your first guru, of course, are your own parents or whoever plays the parental role. So we are duty bound. Honor thy father and thy mother is the same virtuous, noble reaction and duty in all truthful cultures. Anyway, he says, I'll do what is necessary. You know well enough that at his bidding I would drown myself in the sea. And here, mother, I give you my solemn promise that I shall fulfill the king's promise to you and never break my word. Now, this is in the face of some controversial questions that can be asked. Why doesn't Rama just say, for the common good, let me just carry on? But you see, his primary duty is to truth. And if he breaks that truth in a small way, then maybe as ruler, he'll break it in more significant ways. So when Rama uttered these words, Kaikeyi, of course, got exalted, for she knew she had conquered. And the king, for his part, was in despair, seeing that all escape was now completely barred, because his one secret hope was that Rama would say, no, I won't do it. And therefore, the pitiless Kaikeyi says these ultimately terrible words, Rama, your words are worthy of you. What higher duty has a son than helping fulfill the word of his father? And now I shall tell you what your father's promises to me. When in the battle with Sambara, your father was wounded, I rescued and revived him. She tells the whole story. And your father, in gratitude for having been rescued by me and nursed by me when grievously wounded, he said, ask two things at least. Anything you want, I'll do my best to fulfill them. And I never did it. I never asked him for anything up to now. And so these are the things. Firstly, that Bharata should be anointed Yuvaraja, that is, king's successor, that he should be the king ultimately, and that you should be sent away this very day to the Dandaka forest to remain in exile for 14 years, suspecting that Rama was like everybody else. In other words, if Bharata becomes king, Rama will have a military coup against him, or persuade his brother, or kill his brother. And so misunderstands, misreads Rama completely, because her mind is poisoned. This is, in psychology, is called projection, of course. See, that what is within you, you suspect is in others also. Anyway, you have to remain there for 14 years. Now that seems like a simple request, but there are repercussions. First of all, you have to take all your royal accoutrements, all your jewelry, all your wealth, all your possessions, you have to leave it. Because in those days, you had two choices. You can be executed or exiled. Who will exile you? Then you're not a threat. If you take all your royal entourage and an army with you, you're a threat. And so she says, it goes on, you have sworn solemnly to carry out his promise to me. And now it's your duty to prove true to your word, your pledged word, your promise. If you find right conduct as hard as your father did, that's another matter. His father is sitting there in a weakened condition. The inference is, if you are like your father and break your word, or even think of breaking your word, you are as weak and pathetic as he is. Anyway, otherwise, listen to what I say. It's for you now to relinquish the installation and to go into exile with all the all the signs of a hermit, matted locks as the ancient sages had it, and hermit weeds, leaving the preparations now ready to serve for Bharat's installation. You make your cloth out of bark. And she gleefully had the bark clothing ready. You know, you'd strip away bark from a tree, you beat it with water until it becomes softened, and you wear this because it's the product of the forest, and you have no possession other than what is there. So when she had uttered these cruel words, unfeeling words, of course, naturally the king writhes in agony. But Rama heard her in an untroubled state. He was extremely calm. And Kaikeyi beheld this seeming miracle. She was expecting trouble from Rama, suspecting he was like any other ordinary person. And there was not the slightest sign of disappointment or sorrow in Rama's face. That is the sign. You take it with great equanimity. Some disaster happens, and the person of steady wisdom will take it in a routine way almost. And so, smiling, the prince said, "Is that all, mother?" As if it's nothing. "Surely the king's promise must be fulfilled. My hair shall be twisted, and I shall wear the bark, and I shall go this very day to the forest. This very day. I won't wait, I won't make preparations. Immediately I'll go. The coronation is now. This preparation, this reaction is truly called vairagya, detachment. So far, what have you learned about Rama? First of all, he is faithful to the promise. He is the embodiment of truth, regardless of the circumstances. Secondly, he has honored his father and his mother even, both, because he's taking Kaikeyi as his own mother. He's taking all these dramatic changes in circumstances without even wincing, taking it as not as misfortune at all, taking it in a highly balanced and philosophical way, teaching us how our reactions should also be. How can we cultivate it? There has to be an inner shift toward that. There has to be an inner peace of mind, a strong sense of faith. And so this is what Rama has. Taking life with its ups and downs, its vicissitudes, and being equal-minded to what is called pairs of opposites, pain and pleasure, hot and cold, joy and sorrow, etc. And then Kaikeyi speaks these prophetic words when she says to Rama, and says to Rama's dutifulness that would bring him glory undying, that glory will continue as long as the Himalayas stand and the waters of Ganga flow, and as long as the ocean waves beat on the solid earth. This she concedes. So Rama says to Kaikeyi in unperturbed, calm tones, "I'm not the least annoyed, just to give you the assurance. Would I not be happy to give anything to Bharata? If Bharata wants the kingdom, let him have it. Even if no one asked me, I would cheerfully give him my all. And how can I hold back a moment when my father commands it? What pains me a little is that father should have entertained any doubt about my willingness to go. Doubting my adherence to truth and supporting him in his dilemma. Why should he have hesitated to tell me what he wanted and left it to you to say this thing to me? Am I not his son, bound to his behest, every request, every whim I'm prepared to carry out? What glory or what joy can I look for except to make good his word? How did I deserve it, that my father should avert his face from me and refrain from speaking loving words to me? My grievance, if at all, is that he didn't send for me straight and tell me straight and give me his command in a kingly way. Anyway, I shall go to the forest this very day with absolutely no regret. So send swift messengers at once to fetch Bharata home. And the prince's face, says Valmiki, glowed like a sacrificial fire bursting into flame as ghee is poured into it. And Kaikeyi felt glad at her parents' success and her victory, and she should not look into the future and its sorrow, for what greater grief can come to a woman than the scorn of her own son? And she's avoided it. She hasn't, of course, considered the scorn of others. Greed deceived her into folly, because it really is greed, and prevented her from understanding aright the mind of her own son Bharata, who was pure-minded, like all the sons. Anyway, like a captive elephant, which is hemmed in on all sides, Dasaratha lay in anguish. With needless harshness, Kaikeyi hurries to Rama, saying, "Don't wait for the king to speak and prolong the affair." And at this, Rama says, "Mother, you have not, it seems, known me, because I value no pleasure higher than to honor my father's pledge. Let Bharata carry the burden of kingship and look after our aged father, and it will indeed give him the greatest joy." Now, of course, other people are affected. What about Rama's own mother, Kausalya? What about his wife Sita? What about his other brothers? What about Lakshmana, who is the constant companion and support of Rama? Rama and Lakshmana, they go together well. What about these? So the primary thing is truth, and now he has to tell everybody else the uncomfortable truth. He has to go to Kausalya, bid farewell. He has to go to Sita and say, "I'll see you in 14 years." He has to say goodbye to Lakshmana, his constant companion. More than that, of course, he has to say farewell to the people who are expecting his coronation. So it's not quite as simple as he puts on bark, mats his hair, and goes off into the forest and goes away for 14 years, and we don't know what happens in those 14 years. Of course, we do know, because we know that the whole story begins with Ravana in Sri Lanka. Anyway, Dasaratha, silent till now, he hasn't spoken, though listening intently, of course. He, of course, reacts. He moans aloud. Moans like any other human being would. And the difference, the contrast is Rama is exhibiting strength, and Kaikeyi and Dasaratha are exhibiting weakness in their own way. Rama touches the feet of his father and Kaikeyi both and hurries out of the chamber. Now Lakshmana had been standing outside, and he doesn't know anything about this. He has no idea what's happened. And with eyes red with anger, he follows Rama. And on the way, Rama saw the vessels holding the consecrated water for the coronation. And he walks round them in worship with calm majesty. He leaves behind the white umbrella, now the royal insignia, ready for the coronation, and then goes and advises the crowds, "Please disperse." And the prince, in whom Dasaratha had been vanquished, went to the house of Queen Kausalya to give her the news and take her blessings before departing to the forest. So at this point, we should really, listening to the story, exercise a little bit of imagination and build up our own hearts and passions and sorrows of the persons figuring in this epic. We could be angry now, we could be resentful, we could be tempted to say, "Hey, Rama, please, wait, don't do this." Many of these things we could do, that would be from a human perspective, not from a higher, noble point of view. We could easily get caught up in passions and sorrows of the people figuring in the whole story, this epic. We could be overwhelmed by Dasaratha's anguish. You know, when you watch a film or a drama, when there are tears and anguish, we become agitated and anguished and sorrowful. In the same way, when there's joy, we could be joyful. Dasaratha's anguish, Rama's cheerful renunciation, the greedy passion of Kaikeyi, which smothered all her noble impulses. These are all familiar phases in our own daily lives. And this is the difference between, as I said earlier, fairy tale and reality of life. Valmiki and Kamban saw with the vision of genius and made the events in Rama's story live again in song. And we too should also see all these events through imagination. And this is the meaning of the tradition, that wherever Rama's tale is told, Hanuman himself joins the gathering and reverently stands with tear-filled eyes listening. We can get caught up in the drama, but it is a drama. Yesterday we passed Hoth Castle, and there was a big film crew there, ready to do filming. I still don't know what they were filming, but Hoth Castle, because of its interior and exterior and the beautiful scenery around, is often the venue for filming an episode. But you see, the film crew do not use the natural lighting of the sun. A little bit of a rarity at the moment in Ireland. And so a big light, artificial light of tremendous strength is available to light up the scenery. And there are security people all around. And there'll be a big table where all the actors can get some food, possibly, and some drink. And there's a director, no doubt, and there's a producer, no doubt, and there are cameras. And the sequences are not as a continuum as we see it in the film. And when we look at this on screen, we often forget. We forget that there are actors playing parts. We forget that there's artificial lighting. We forget that there is an editorial staff ready to cut certain episodes. All of these things we forget. If we have a philosophical attitude that says, actually it's a story, that's why this series is entitled Story of Rama. And what lessons can we learn? That's the important thing. And so we can conclude this part of the story by saying, may everyone that reads or listens or comes across this chapter receive by Rama's grace strength as he has to bear the sorrows that have to be faced in life. And now we come to a different episode completely. The storm and the calm, we can call it. And now Rama has to confront Queen Kausalya's. So Queen Kausalya, his own mother. And she's, of course, unaware of any of these goings on. Just really quickly, I won't preempt the detail anyway for next week. But once she hears the news, she voluntarily says, okay, I'll come to the forest with you, you're my son. And like a concerned cow following the calf, I'll follow you in the forest. Your pains are my pains. But you see, with a calm sense of duty, he says, no. Mother, you need to stay. Kaikeyi is out of the picture now, and you need to be a consolation to your husband, Dasaratha, in his last days, because these will be his last days. He will die from grief. And you need to console him, you need to support him, and so on and so forth. You need to be his wife. Even though you were his first wife and Kaikeyi was his favorite wife, even so, you took it. You took it stoically. But now's the time really to support and to show your love for your husband. And with Kausalya saying, I will follow you, Lakshmana picks up the clue. And now Lakshmana has a feisty temperament and temperature, of course. And he says, okay, let me now go and correct things, and you'll go ahead with the coronation and to hang with the queens, and I'll do what the people want, and so on and so forth. That was his approach. And Rama has to calm him and say, by the way, anger is not a virtue. Anger is toxic. 3 gates of hell are there according to the Bhagavad Gita. Desire, greed, and anger, don't let anger overwhelm you. And you stay here. And you have to look after your other brothers and the queen and so on and so forth. And Lakshmana makes a case. He says, you see, other brothers are there, Bharata will look after all of this and so on and so forth. But where Rama goes, Lakshmana goes. I have to go with you. Now to break it to Sita. Sita, please stay and look after your mother queens. But Sita is the ideal wife. Where Rama goes, Sita goes. Where Sita goes, Rama goes. It's impossible for there to be a Rama without a Sita. There is one unit called Sitaram, and whatever difficulties and pains you go through, I want to go through with you. I always want to be by your side. This is the tremendous love of a wife for the husband, the beloved for the lover for the beloved. And so, making this case, Rama has no choice. And so 3 people set out on a journey for 14 years. Rama, Lakshmana, who wants to look for the roots and the food and foraging in the forests, and wants to also be there to protect Rama and Sita against danger. And the Queen Kausalya gives this counsel. Since I cannot go, please, Lakshmana, make sure that Rama in the forest, Rama is your father, and Sita is your mother. And in this way proceed. This story has so many wonderful lessons of virtues in it. And I'm glad to be telling it in a series. We'll leave it there for next week. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thanks, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.